Honey, your dad changed the password. I can't use his card anymore. My daughter's panicked voice echoed through my quiet Spokane home. But what she didn't know was that I'd just discovered something far worse than locked accounts. For 3 years, I'd trusted my son-in-law Garrett with family paperwork during my wife's cancer treatments, grateful for his help when grief overwhelmed me. I thought he was protecting our family's financial security. I was wrong. The credit monitoring alert that shattered my peaceful retirement revealed $58,000 in fraudulent debt accounts I'd never opened, using information only family members possessed. Every statement had been secretly mailed to my daughter's house for months. As a retired Boeing engineer who'd spent decades designing fail-safe systems, I knew exactly what this meant. Someone with intimate access to my personal information had been systematically stealing my identity while I mourned my wife of 48 years. But Garrett had no idea who he was really dealing with. He thought he'd targeted a grieving, vulnerable old man who'd never fight back. What he didn't expect was that this old man had built aircraft systems for 35 years, and when something fails, I don't just fix it. I completely redesign it, and what I discovered about my charming son-in-law would change everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Sunday afternoons in October have always been sacred in the Townsend household. At 71, I've learned to treasure these simple moments. The smell of pot roast filling my dining room, autumn light streaming through Dorothy's lace curtains, and my daughter Bethany's laughter mixing with her husband Garrett's smooth voice as we shared our weekly family dinner. "Dad, this roast is perfect," Bethany said, cutting another piece. "Mom's recipe never fails." Her smile carried that bittersweet edge it always held when mentioning Dorothy, who'd been gone 3 years now. Garrett raised his wine glass, always expensive wine with him, to family traditions and the man who keeps them alive. His charm never felt forced, which made it so effective. Speaking of which, Virgil, I've been thinking about those investment accounts we discussed. Technology moves fast these days, and I know it can be overwhelming for your generation. There it was again, that subtle reminder of my age wrapped in helpful concern. I appreciate the offer, Garrett, but I've managed my finances for 50 years. Of course, of course. His laugh was warm practiced. I just remember how stressed you got trying to set up that online banking during Mom's illness. I was happy to help then. Dorothy's final months, when grief had made me vulnerable, desperate for any assistance while I watched cancer steal my wife of 48 years. When I'd gratefully accepted help with paperwork from my son-in-law, not questioning what papers or why he needed my personal information. Dorothy always said, "Trust, but verify," I murmured, touching the framed photos on the sideboard. I got too comfortable with just trusting. Monday morning arrived with Boeing precision, my internal clock still set to 35 years of aircraft manufacturing schedules. Coffee at 6, news at 7, emails by 8. The credit monitoring alert arrived at exactly 9:30 a.m., 48 hours after whatever had triggered it. My engineering mind processed the words methodically. New account activity. Impossible. I hadn't opened a credit account in 8 years, maintained just 2 cards, paid cash for everything else. This had to be a mistake. I tapped the alert and felt my blood pressure spike. 3 accounts. 3 credit cards I'd never seen, never applied for, never knew existed. Chase Sapphire Reserve, $19,400 balance. American Express Gold, $21,200 balance. Discover at $17,400 balance. Total fraudulent debt, $58,000. The shock lasted 30 seconds. Then my Boeing training kicked in. When systems fail, you don't panic, you investigate. You gather data. You find the root cause. I spent the morning on phone calls. Chase Fraud Department. "Sir, this account was opened 6 months ago using your social security number and employment history." American Express. The application included your mother's maiden name and previous addresses going back 20 years. Discover. All statements have been mailed to 1247 Cedar Ridge Drive. 1247 Cedar Ridge Drive, Bethany's address. By Monday afternoon, I'd transformed my dining room into a command center, Dorothy's old filing cabinets repurposed for evidence collection. 40 years of designing aircraft systems had taught me one thing: when something doesn't fit, you trace every connection until you find the failure point. The phone calls continued. Credit companies, fraud departments, documentation requests. Each conversation revealed more sophisticated details. Whoever had done this possessed intimate knowledge of my financial history, my employment record, even my mother's maiden name information I'd shared with precious few people. Tuesday morning brought the final piece of the initial puzzle. Every fraudulent statement, every piece of correspondence, every trace of this elaborate theft had been systematically redirected to my daughter's home. Someone with access to my personal information had been intercepting evidence for months, ensuring I'd never see the growing debt attached to my name. I sat in Dorothy's chair, surrounded by printouts and phone notes, feeling the weight of betrayal settle in my chest. This wasn't random identity theft. This was personal. This was family. And I was going to find out exactly who had violated the trust Dorothy and I had built over a lifetime of hard work. Tuesday evening found me in Dorothy's old sewing room, now converted into my makeshift command center. The irony wasn't lost on me. The space where my wife had created beautiful quilts with methodical precision was now where I'd unraveled the threads of a financial crime. 35 years designing 737 systems had taught me one fundamental truth. When something fails, you don't guess at solutions. You trace every connection methodically until you find the root cause. I spread 3 legal pads across Dorothy's cutting table, each one dedicated to a different aspect of this investigation. Page 1. Timeline. Every fraudulent transaction, every account opening date cross-referenced with significant events in my life. Page 2. Access points. Who had my personal information when they had it, and what legitimate reason they'd been given. Page 3. Evidence chain. Documentation requirements, legal procedures, what I'd need to build an airtight case. The timeline revealed a disturbing pattern. All 3 accounts had been opened between January and March 2021, exactly when Dorothy was undergoing her final round of chemotherapy treatments. When I'd been overwhelmed, desperate for help with anything that didn't involve watching cancer steal my wife. When I'd gratefully accepted assistance with paperwork and online banking setup from family members who claimed to want to help. Wednesday morning, I was reviewing my notes over coffee when I heard Fletcher Morrison's voice drifting over our shared fence. Fletcher had been my neighbor for 12 years, a retired Spokane police detective who'd spent 30 years investigating financial crimes. If anyone could guide me through this maze, it was him. Morning, Virgil. Fletcher called, trimming his hedge with the same precision he'd once applied to criminal investigations. You're up early. Everything all right? I made a decision that would change everything. Fletcher, could I buy you coffee? I need some professional advice. An hour later, we sat in Grind Coffee, the neighborhood shop, where Fletcher held court most mornings, with other retired first responders. I'd brought copies of everything: credit reports, fraudulent statements, my timeline analysis. Fletcher studied the documents with the methodical attention that had made him one of Spokane PD's most respected detectives. Virgil, this isn't random identity theft, he said finally, his weathered face grave. Random thieves don't have access to your mother's maiden name, your employment history going back decades, or the ability to redirect mail for months without detection. Someone had inside access to your personal information. The words hit like a punch to the chest, confirming what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. You're saying this was someone I trusted? I'm saying whoever did this knew your routines, your vulnerabilities, and exactly when you'd be too distracted to notice irregularities. Fletcher leaned forward, his detective instincts fully engaged. Tell me about the timeline. January through March 2021, what was happening in your life? Dorothy's final treatments, the worst months of our marriage. I was at the hospital, constantly barely keeping up with basic bills, let alone monitoring credit reports. The memory still ached. Garrett helped with a lot of paperwork during that time. Said he wanted to take the financial stress off my shoulders. Fletcher's expression darkened. Your son-in-law had access to your personal documents during the exact window when these accounts were opened. Wednesday afternoon, Fletcher walked me through the basics of fraud investigation, evidence preservation, documentation requirements, legal procedures. His 30 years of experience provided a framework my engineering mind could work with. We established protocols, document everything, assume nothing, build the case, methodically. The key, Fletcher explained, is proving intent and access. Random identity theft is one thing. Systematic exploitation by someone with intimate knowledge of your life is something else entirely. That's elder abuse, and prosecutors take it very seriously. Thursday morning brought the breakthrough that transformed suspicion into certainty. Fletcher had suggested checking with the Postal Service about any address changes on my accounts. One phone call to the USPS customer service line revealed the truth I'd been dreading. Mr. Townsend, we show 3 change of address forms filed for your mail between January and March 2021, the postal clerk explained. All forwarding financial correspondence to 1247 Cedar Ridge Drive. The forms were filed online using your personal information. 1247 Cedar Ridge Drive, Bethany's address. During Dorothy's illness, when Garrett had helped with my paperwork, I sat in my kitchen staring at the notes I'd taken during the call, feeling the weight of betrayal settle deeper. This wasn't just theft, it was calculated exploitation of my grief, my trust, and my family's love. Someone had watched me struggle through my wife's death and seen opportunity instead of suffering. Fletcher arrived within an hour of my call, took one look at my face, and poured himself coffee without asking. "You found something. Change of address forms, filed during Dorothy's treatments. All my financial mail redirected to Bethany's house." My voice sounded hollow, even to myself. Fletcher studied his coffee cup for a long moment. "Virgil, I've seen this pattern before. This level of sophistication, the timing. The systematic approach, this isn't someone's first rodeo. Whoever did this has done it before, probably multiple times." The implication hung in the air between us like smoke. Not just theft, not just betrayal, but a pattern of predation that might extend far beyond my family. "What do I do now?" I asked. Fletcher's expression carried the weight of 3 decades investigating the worst of human nature. "Now we build a case. But Virgil, you need to understand something. When we expose this, it's going to destroy relationships. It's going to tear your family apart." "Are you prepared for that?" I thought of Dorothy, of the values we'd built our marriage on, of the legacy we'd hoped to leave. My wife used to say that sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are completely different. She never said choose the easy thing. Fletcher nodded slowly. "Then we'd better make sure we do this right." Friday morning, I walked into Chase Bank's fraud investigation office with Fletcher's coaching fresh in my mind and a manila folder thick with documentation. The specialist, Maria Santos, had 20 years of experience with financial crimes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every scam imaginable. "Mr. Townsend, I've reviewed your preliminary report," she said, spreading my fraudulent statements across her desk. "This Chase Sapphire Reserve account was opened on February 14th, 2021, Valentine's Day." The irony wasn't lost on me while I'd been buying Dorothy flowers. For what would be our last Valentines together, someone was stealing my identity. For 2 hours, Maria walked me through the application process, revealing details that made my blood run cold. "Sir, whoever opened this account had intimate knowledge of your financial history, going back 20 years. Your first mortgage amount from 1987, your Boeing employee ID number, even your mother's maiden name, and the street you grew up on in Tacoma. Information I'd shared with precious few people. Information that wasn't available online or through casual observation. Information that required either professional hacking skills or intimate access to my personal documents. The application was submitted online, but supporting documentation was mailed from a Spokane address." Maria continued. "The applicant knew exactly which documents to provide and how to answer our verification questions. This wasn't someone guessing, this was someone who knew your life story." Monday brought another devastating revelation. My credit union visit revealed a 4th account I hadn't known existed, a Visa card with a $12,000 balance opened in March 2021 during Dorothy's final week of treatments. The timing felt like a violation of her memory, a desecration of the most sacred moments of our marriage. "Mr. Townsend, the credit union fraud investigator, explained, this application came with a change of address request, routing all statements to 1247 Cedar Ridge Drive. The applicant even provided a utility bill from that address to verify residency." The systematic nature of the deception was becoming clear. This wasn't impulsive theft. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign that had exploited my grief and trust with surgical precision. Wednesday's phone calls to American Express and Discover painted an identical picture. Both fraud departments confirmed the same pattern applications filed during my wife's illness, using information that required intimate access to my personal documents, with all correspondence redirected to Bethany's address. "Mr. Townsend," the American Express investigator said, "in my 15 years handling fraud cases, I've rarely seen this level of sophistication from individual thieves. This has the hallmarks of organized identity theft, except the personal information access suggests an inside job." Fletcher called that evening to check on my progress. When I shared the day's discoveries, his detective instincts sharpened. "Virgil, the timeline is too precise to be coincidental. January through March 2021, that's exactly when you were most vulnerable, most distracted, most likely to trust someone offering help with paperwork." Thursday morning brought the pattern recognition that transformed my investigation from personal betrayal into something larger and more sinister. I spread all the documentation across my dining room table. Bank statements, application dates, Dorothy's medical appointment calendar, and my own journal entries from that terrible winter. Every fraudulent account had been opened during a week when Dorothy had major treatments. February 14th, the day after her worst chemotherapy session. March 8th, 3 days before her final surgery. The timing wasn't random. Someone had been watching our medical calendar, waiting for moments when I'd be too overwhelmed to notice irregularities in my mail or financial accounts. He waited until I was distracted by my wife's cancer treatments, I said aloud to Dorothy's photograph. Predators hunt the wounded. Friday's breakthrough came through Fletcher's connections in the banking industry. Chase Bank's security department agreed to review their branch footage from February 2021, focusing on the days around the fraudulent application. The call came at 3:47 p.m. Mr. Townsend, we've located relevant security footage. A male individual approximately 35 years old visited our branch on February 12th and 15th, 2021. He spoke with account specialists both days and provided extensive documentation for identity verification. My hands trembled as I wrote down the details. Can you describe this individual? Caucasian male, brown hair, approximately 6 feet tall, well-dressed. He appeared very familiar with banking procedures and knew exactly what documentation to provide. He even brought additional supporting materials we hadn't requested, almost like he was anticipating our verification questions. I knew that description. I'd seen that systematic preparation, that ability to anticipate questions and provide perfect answers. I'd watched those same qualities charm my daughter into marriage and convince me to trust him with my personal information during the darkest period of my life. We can make this footage available for law enforcement review. The security specialist continued. The individual's face is clearly visible, and he spent nearly an hour in our branch on February 15th, finalizing the account setup. That evening I sat in Dorothy's chair, surrounded by evidence that painted a picture of calculated predation. Someone had studied my vulnerabilities, mapped my routines, and executed a systematic theft that exploited my grief and trust. Someone who knew exactly when I'd be too distracted to notice, too overwhelmed to question, too grateful for help to verify. Someone who'd sat at my dinner table every Sunday for 3 years, calling me Dad and promising to take care of my daughter. The security footage would provide the final piece of evidence I needed, but in my heart, I already knew what that footage would show. I already knew whose face would be staring back at me from those bank security cameras. The question now wasn't who had stolen from me. The question was what I was going to do about it. Saturday afternoon brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. Bethany arrived at my front door with the confusion and frustration of someone whose world had suddenly stopped making sense. Her scrubs were wrinkled from a double shift at the physical therapy clinic, her hair pulled back in the practical ponytail she'd worn since childhood when life got overwhelming. "Dad, what's going on with your accounts?" she asked, settling into Dorothy's chair with the exhausted grace of a woman juggling too many responsibilities. "Garrett tried to use your credit card for groceries yesterday, and it was declined. He's worried you might be having memory issues." The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable Garrett, positioning himself as the concerned son-in-law while suggesting I was becoming senile. I chose my words carefully, knowing that everything I said would be reported back to him. I discovered some irregularities in my credit monitoring, so I secured all my accounts while I investigate. I kept my voice calm, matter of fact. It's just a precaution. "Irregularities?" Bethany leaned forward, her nurse's instincts engaging. "What kind of irregularities?" "Fraudulent accounts opened in my name. About $58,000 in debt I never authorized." I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of prior knowledge. What I saw instead was genuine shock. "Dad, that's terrible. Have you called the police? Filed reports?" Her concern seemed authentic, which both relieved and worried me. If she was truly unaware, then Garrett had been playing a deeper game than I'd imagined. Sunday brought our second conversation, this one in my kitchen over the coffee and apple turnovers that had been our tradition since she was 12. I'd spent Saturday night deciding how much to reveal, how quickly to shatter her trust in the man she'd married. "Honey, I need to show you something," I said, spreading the Chase Bank statements across my kitchen table. "These accounts were opened using my personal information during Mom's final treatments." Bethany studied the documents with the analytical mind she'd inherited from both her parents. "Dad, there has to be an explanation. Garrett's been nothing but helpful since Mom got sick. He handled so much paperwork when you were overwhelmed with hospital visits." There it was, the first crack in the facade. Garrett had indeed handled paperwork during Dorothy's illness. The question was, which paperwork and why? "Helpful people don't hide evidence, honey. They share information." I pointed to the mailing address on each statement. "All of these were sent to your house. For months. Did you ever see them?" Her silence stretched long enough for doubt to creep in. "Garrett handles our mail. He says it's one less thing for me to worry about after long shifts at the clinic. Tuesday's coffee shop meeting was neutral territory, a place where we could talk without the emotional weight of family memories pressing down on us." I'd brought copies of the security footage stills Chase Bank had provided clear images of a man I knew she'd recognize. Bethany, I need you to look at something. I slid the photographs across our table at Grind Coffee, the same place where Fletcher had helped me understand the scope of this betrayal. These are from Chase Bank's security cameras, February 15th, 2021. She picked up the first image and I watched the color drain from her face. That's Garrett. But why would he be at Chase Bank? We bank at the credit union. According to the bank records, he was opening a credit card account in my name, using information only family members would have. I kept my voice gentle, watching her world begin to crack. The same day Mom had her worst reaction to chemotherapy. There has to be an explanation, she repeated, but her voice carried less conviction than before. Maybe he was helping you with something and you forgot. Honey, I never asked for help with banking, and I never gave permission for anyone to open accounts in my name. Thursday brought the breakthrough I'd hoped for and dreaded in equal measure. Bethany called me at 2:30 p.m., her voice shaking with something between anger and disbelief. Dad, I need to see you. Now. She arrived within 20 minutes carrying a cardboard box that seemed to weigh more than its physical contents. I was cleaning out the garage storage area looking for Mom's Christmas decorations. I found this box behind the water heater, hidden under old tarps. The box contained 3 years of financial statements. Not just mine, but statements for accounts I'd never seen, credit cards I'd never applied for, correspondence from banks and credit agencies, all addressed to me but delivered to her house. Every piece of evidence Garrett had been hiding, stored like trophies of his deception. Bethany, did you know any of these were being delivered to your house? No. Her voice was barely a whisper. Garrett always said he'd handle the mail to make things easier for me. I trusted him. She looked up at me with Dorothy's eyes filled with the same pain I'd seen when my wife realized her body was betraying her. Dad, what does this mean? Saturday morning brought the admission that changed everything. Bethany sat in my kitchen surrounded by evidence of systematic deception, finally ready to acknowledge what her heart had been fighting for a week. Dad, I need to tell you something. She stared into her coffee cup as if it held answers to questions she was afraid to ask. During Mom's illness, Garrett did handle a lot of paperwork. He said you were too overwhelmed to deal with financial details, and I believed him. I thought he was being helpful. What kind of paperwork, honey? Insurance forms, medical billing, bank statements. He said he was organizing everything to make it easier for you to focus on Mom. Her voice cracked slightly. He asked for your social security number, said he needed it for insurance claims. I gave it to him. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Garrett hadn't just stolen my information, he'd manipulated my daughter into providing it, using her love for both her mother and me as weapons against our family. Bethany, helpful people don't hide evidence for 3 years. They don't intercept someone else's mail or open secret accounts. I reached across the table and took her hand. This isn't your fault. You were trying to help during an impossible time. She squeezed my fingers, and for the first time in a week, I saw a flicker of the strength that would help her survive what was coming. Dad, what are we going to do? We're going to find out exactly who your husband really is. Sunday afternoon found Bethany and me in her garage, surrounded by 3 years of hidden correspondence, spread across folding tables, like pieces of a complex puzzle. The autumn light filtering through dusty windows, illuminated bank statements, credit card offers, and collection notices, a paper trail of systematic deception that painted a devastating picture of calculated betrayal. Dad, look at this, Bethany said, holding up a Chase Bank statement dated March 2021. This shows a $3,200 charge at Best Buy on the same day Mom had her final surgery. While you were at the hospital holding her hand, someone was buying electronics with your stolen identity. The timeline made my blood run cold. March 15th, 2021, the day Dorothy's surgeon had delivered the news that there was nothing more they could do. While I'd been processing the reality of losing my wife of 48 years, someone had been celebrating with expensive purchases on fraudulent credit cards. Honey, we need to document everything systematically, I said, falling back on the project management skills that had served me through decades of aircraft design. Every statement, every charge, every date. When this goes to court, we need an airtight case. Monday brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. Bethany had spent Sunday night processing the evidence, and by morning her shock had crystallized into determined anger. She waited until Garrett left for work, then called in sick to the clinic, something she'd never done in 12 years of physical therapy practice. When Garrett returned home for lunch, he found us in his kitchen, surrounded by evidence of his deception. The change in his demeanor was immediate and telling. The easy smile faltered, and something cold flickered behind his eyes before the charm reasserted itself. "What's all this paperwork, babe?" he asked, kissing Bethany's cheek with practiced affection. "Looks like tax season exploded in here." "These are financial statements addressed to my father that have been delivered to our house for 3 years," Bethany said, her voice steady but strained. "Statements for accounts he never opened, using information only family members would have." Garrett's laugh was too loud, too forced. "Beth, honey, you know your dad's been confused since your mom died. He probably applied for these and forgot. Grief affects memory, especially in older people." "Stop calling my father old people," Bethany snapped, and I felt a surge of pride at her fierce defense. "His mind is sharper than yours, and he didn't open these accounts." The mask slipped for just a moment, long enough for me to see the calculation behind Garrett's concerned expression, the way he was already formulating his next manipulation. Wednesday brought increasingly desperate explanations. Garrett had spent Tuesday researching identity theft, arming himself with technical jargon and victim-blaming tactics that might have worked on someone less systematic than a retired Boeing engineer. "You have to understand this happens to seniors all the time," he explained to Bethany over dinner, his voice carrying the patronizing tone of someone talking to a child. "Identity thieves target older people because they're less tech-savvy, less likely to notice irregularities. Your father's generation just doesn't understand how vulnerable they are online." "Then explain the change of address forms," I said quietly. "Explain how someone got my mother's maiden name, my first mortgage amount, from 1987, my Boeing employee ID number." Garrett's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Identity thieves are sophisticated these days, Virgil. They can find anything online if they know where to look. Not my mother's maiden name. Not my employee ID from 35 years ago. That information isn't online. It's in family documents, stored in filing cabinets that only family members have accessed." Friday evening brought the first real crack in Garrett's facade. He'd been drinking something I'd noticed happening more frequently since the investigation began, and his usual charm was wearing thin around the edges. "You're making Beth paranoid with all this detective bullshit," he said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "You're an old man who's confused about his finances, and instead of admitting it, you're creating conspiracy theories that are tearing this family apart." "Garrett," Bethany warned, but he was beyond listening. "No, Beth, someone needs to say it. Your father is 71 years old, living alone, probably not taking his medications properly. This whole identity theft thing is just his way of avoiding responsibility for financial mistakes he's too proud to admit." The transformation was startling. The concerned son-in-law had vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating, someone who saw manipulation as a tool and family loyalty as a weakness to exploit. Sunday's family dinner was supposed to be our traditional weekly gathering, but it felt more like a battlefield. Garrett arrived with expensive wine and his most charming smile, but I could see the tension in his shoulders the way his eyes never quite met mine. "Virgil, I think we need to clear the air about this misunderstanding," he said, settling into his usual chair with false confidence. "Families shouldn't fight over money, especially when it's based on confusion." "There's no confusion, Garrett. There's evidence. 3 years of hidden statements, security footage, bank records, all pointing to systematic fraud committed by someone with intimate access to my personal information." The mask didn't just slip this time, it shattered completely. Garrett's face twisted with something ugly, something that had been hiding behind his charm for 3 years. "You think you're so smart with your engineering background and your Boeing pension?" he snarled, all pretense abandoned. "But you're just another lonely old man who can't accept that the world has moved on without him." Bethany went rigid beside me, finally seeing what I had glimpsed in bank security footage. The real Garrett the Predator, who'd been living in her house, sleeping in her bed, planning his next move while she worked double shifts to support their lifestyle. "Get out," she whispered, her voice carrying the quiet strength she'd inherited from her mother. "Get out of my house. Now." Garrett's laugh was bitter, threatening. "This is my house too, Beth, and when you come to your senses, you'll realize your paranoid father is trying to destroy our marriage, because he can't stand seeing you happy." But as he looked at Bethany's face, at the disgust and recognition dawning there, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Not defeat, but calculation. Not remorse, but planning. Garrett wasn't giving up. He was regrouping, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Monday morning brought validation I hadn't dared hope for. Fletcher called at 8:30 a.m., his voice carrying the satisfaction of a detective who'd connected crucial dots in a complex case. "Virgil, I've been working my contacts in the department. Cross-referencing financial fraud cases, targeting Boeing retirees, he said. I found something you need to see. Can you meet me at Millicent Harper's house this afternoon? Millicent Harper lived in a modest craftsman home in the Browns Addition neighborhood, surrounded by the kind of mature trees and careful gardens that spoke of decades of patient tending. At 74, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who'd learned to be cautious about trust, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence of a retired librarian who'd spent 40 years helping people find answers to difficult questions. Mr. Townsend, she said, settling us in her book-lined living room with tea served in delicate china cups. Fletcher tells me you've encountered someone who might be familiar to me, someone who targeted your family's finances during a vulnerable time. The formality in her voice carried weight. This wasn't just politeness, but the careful distance of someone who'd learned to protect herself from further harm. Tuesday's conversation revealed the scope of what we were truly dealing with. Millicent had prepared for our meeting with the same methodical attention to detail I'd learned to apply to aircraft design problems, and her story unfolded with devastating clarity. He called himself Gerald Matthews then, she said, pulling out a manila folder thick with documentation. Targeted my late husband's Boeing pension in 2019, just 6 months after Harold died, from complications of diabetes. Gerald was charming, helpful, eager to assist a grieving widow with complex financial paperwork. The parallels to my own experience were chilling. How did you meet him? Through my daughter, Rebecca. She'd met him at a coffee shop near the hospital, where she worked as a nurse, the same hospital where Harold had received his final treatments. Gerald seemed to appear exactly when we needed help, most offering to assist with insurance claims and pension paperwork. Millicent's voice carried the bitter wisdom of hindsight. He said he specialized in helping families navigate complex financial systems during times of loss. The targeting wasn't random, it was surgical. Gerald Garrett had researched Boeing retirees, identified vulnerable families dealing with medical crises, and positioned himself as a helpful solution to overwhelming problems. Thursday brought the evidence comparison session that transformed suspicion into certainty. Millicent spread her documentation across my dining room table alongside my own evidence, and the pattern was undeniable. Account applications filed during medical emergencies, change of address forms routing statements away from victims, identical personal information requirements that could only be met by someone with intimate family access. Look at the dates, Millicent said, pointing to her Chase Bank statements. September 15th, 2019, the day after Harold's funeral. Gerald offered to help Rebecca with the reception arrangements and asked for my social security number to handle insurance paperwork. Within 48 hours, he was opening credit accounts in my name. The sophistication was breathtaking. Gerald Dapoy Garrett hadn't just stolen information, he'd studied our vulnerabilities, mapped our support systems, and exploited our family bonds as weapons against us. Millicent, how much did he steal from you? $43,000 across 5 different accounts. By the time I discovered the fraud, Gerald had disappeared, and Rebecca was too ashamed to help with the investigation. She blamed herself for trusting him, for giving him access to our family information. Pain flickered across Millicent's face. I haven't spoken to my daughter in 2 years. Gerald didn't just steal my money. He destroyed my relationship with the only family I had left. Saturday brought legal precedent that strengthened our case immeasurably. Millicent had kept meticulous records of her fraud investigation, including correspondence with banks, credit agencies, and law enforcement. Her documentation provided a roadmap for building a prosecution case that could withstand legal scrutiny. The Spokane police classified my case as elder financial abuse. She explained, showing me official reports and investigative summaries. But without Rebecca's cooperation and with Gerald's disappearance, the prosecutor couldn't build a strong enough case for trial. The investigation was suspended pending new evidence. New evidence, like security footage from Chase Bank, showing the same man who'd victimized both our families, like a current address and identity that could be verified and prosecuted. Millicent, would you be willing to testify if we can bring Gerald or Garrett to trial? Her smile was fierce with long-delayed justice. Mr. Townsend, I've been waiting 3 years for that opportunity. Sunday afternoon brought the alliance formation that would change everything. Fletcher joined us in Millicent's living room, and together we made the decision that would transform our individual tragedies into a coordinated prosecution strategy. We're not just victims anymore, Millicent, I said, feeling the weight of Dorothy's memory guiding my words. We're witnesses building a case that can protect other families from what we've endured. Fletcher leaned forward, his detective instincts fully engaged. With 2 documented victims and identical methods, we have the foundation for a pattern prosecution. But Millicent, I need to ask, in your research and investigation, did you find evidence of other victims? Millicent's expression grew grave. Through online support groups, fraud victims, I've connected with 4 other Boeing retiree families who reported similar experiences between 2018 and 2021. Different names, Gerald Matthews, Gary Morrison, Grant Miller, but identical methods, identical targeting of Boeing pensions during family medical crises. The room fell silent as the scope of Garrett's predation became clear. Not 2 victims, but at least 6 families. Not isolated incidents, but a systematic campaign of exploitation targeting one of Spokane's most respected communities. 6 families, I said quietly. How many more that we don't know about? Fletcher's expression carried the weight of 3 decades investigating financial crimes. Virgil, we're not just dealing with identity theft anymore. We're dealing with a serial predator who's been operating in our community for years, destroying families and disappearing before consequences could catch up with him. Millicent reached across and squeezed my hand. But this time, he made a mistake. This time, he didn't disappear fast enough. Tuesday morning found me in the downtown offices of Morrison and Associates, facing Hadley Morrison across a mahogany desk that had witnessed 40 years of legal battles. At 62, Hadley specialized in elder law and financial abuse cases, with the kind of methodical precision that reminded me of quality control inspections at Boeing. Mr. Townsend, she said, reviewing the preliminary case summary Fletcher had prepared, what you're describing isn't simple identity theft. This is systematic elder financial abuse with multiple victims and sophisticated criminal methodology. We're looking at federal charges. The consultation fee was $400 in our money. That would have seemed astronomical during my working years, but my Boeing pension and careful retirement planning made it manageable. More importantly, Hadley's reputation for prosecuting financial predators made her worth every dollar. We're not seeking revenge, Hadley. We're building an airtight case that will protect other families and ensure this predator faces appropriate consequences. I spread Millicent's documentation alongside my own evidence. What do we need to make this prosecution ready? Hadley studied the materials with the focused attention of someone who understood that details win cases. Federal prosecutors love pattern evidence, multiple victims, and systematic documentation. What you've compiled here is impressive, but we need to organize it for maximum legal impact. Thursday brought the evidence organization session that transformed months of investigation into prosecution-ready documentation. My dining room became a legal war room with Hadley guiding us through the systematic arrangement of evidence using principles that felt familiar to my engineering background. Think of this like building an aircraft, Hadley explained to our assembled team, myself, Bethany Fletcher, and Millicent. Every component must be perfect, every connection verified, every system tested. Criminal defense attorneys will look for any weakness, any gap in our evidence chain. We organize the evidence into 5 categories: identity theft, documentation, financial impact analysis, timeline correlation with vulnerable periods, witness testimony, preparation, and legal precedent research. Each category required meticulous attention to detail and cross-referencing that reminded me of aircraft systems integration. Dorothy's filing system is going to help us nail a criminal, Bethany said, spreading her mother's meticulously organized medical records across the table. Every appointment, every treatment date, every period when Dad was too overwhelmed to monitor his finances. Monday brought Bethany's insider knowledge, information that transformed our case from strong to devastating. She'd spent the weekend reviewing 3 years of marriage to Garrett, identifying patterns and methods she'd been too trusting to question at the time. He was always eager to help with paperwork, she explained to Hadley. Insurance forms, medical billing, financial documents. He said he wanted to reduce Dad's stress during Mom's illness, and I thought it was thoughtful. Her voice carried the pain of recognition. He asked specific questions about Dad's employment history, his mother's maiden name, even details about their first house in Tacoma. Hadley took detailed notes. This establishes premeditation and systematic information gathering. It shows Garrett wasn't opportunistic. He was methodical in his approach to identity theft. There's more, Bethany continued. He always insisted on getting the mail, said it was one less thing for me to worry about. And he had a home office that was always locked. He said it was for client confidentiality from his marketing work. Wednesday's legal strategy development session established our dual-track approach. Hadley outlined both civil and criminal prosecution paths, explaining how each would serve different purposes in achieving justice and restitution. The criminal case focuses on punishment and protecting future victims, she explained. Federal identity theft charges carry significant prison time and establish a criminal record that will follow Garrett for life. The civil case focuses on financial recovery and damages for emotional distress. Fletcher's police connections proved invaluable in understanding prosecution requirements. The federal prosecutor I've been working with says cases like this succeed when they tell a clear story, he reported. Victim method impact pattern evidence. We have all 5 elements documented and verified. Friday brought the final preparation session that felt like mission planning from my Boeing days. Every team member had specific responsibilities. Every piece of evidence had been verified and cross-referenced. Every potential defense strategy had been anticipated and countered. Hadley, what happens when we confront Garrett with this evidence? I asked, reviewing our confrontation strategy for the final time. Based on my experience with financial predators, he'll likely follow a predictable pattern, she replied. Denial, victim blaming, deflection to technical explanations, then either confession or desperate attempts to destroy evidence. That's why we're documenting everything and having witnesses present. As Friday evening approached, I sat in Dorothy's chair, surrounded by the fruits of 2 weeks of legal preparation. The case was ready. The team was prepared. The evidence was overwhelming. Dorothy, I said quietly to her photograph, tomorrow we start getting justice for what he did to our family during your final months. Sunday morning brought the final team meeting that confirmed our readiness. 6 people gathered in my living room myself. Bethany Fletcher, Millicent Hadley, and her legal assistant, who would document the confrontation for court purposes. The legal framework is established, Hadley announced. Federal prosecutors are standing by to review evidence from the confrontation. Civil damages have been calculated at $200,000 across all victims. Criminal charges include federal identity theft, mail fraud, and elder financial abuse. Fletcher reviewed the safety protocols we'd established. Garrett's shown increasing desperation and anger as his control has slipped. We're treating this confrontation as potentially dangerous with backup law enforcement on standby. Millicent squeezed my hand. Virgil, 3 years ago, I felt helpless and alone when Gerald destroyed my family. Today I feel like we're taking back control. Bethany looked around the room at the team we'd assembled. A retired engineer, a grieving widow, an experienced detective, a skilled attorney, and a daughter who'd found the courage to confront the man who'd betrayed her trust. Dad-Mom would be proud of what we've built here. Not just the legal case, but the way we've turned our pain into protection for other families. The legal strategy was complete. The team was ready. Tomorrow we would confront Garrett with evidence so overwhelming that his 3-year reign of deception would finally end. But as I looked around the room at the people who'd become my allies in this fight for justice, I realized we'd accomplished something more important than building a legal case. We'd built a family of survivors who refused to let a predator win. At exactly 6:00 p.m., Garrett's BMW pulled into my driveway. With the punctuality that had once impressed me as reliability, but now struck me as the calculated precision of a predator maintaining his cover. He walked through my front door, carrying expensive wine and wearing the charming smile that had fooled my family for 3 years. "Evening, Virgil," he said, settling into his usual chair at my dining room table. "Smells like Dorothy's pot roast recipe. Bethany's been practicing." His casual reference to my late wife using her memory as a tool for manipulation ignited a cold fury I kept carefully hidden behind my own practiced smile. "Actually, Garrett, tonight's menu is a little different," I replied, gesturing to the systematic arrangement of evidence that covered every surface of my dining room. "We're serving truth." The transformation in Garrett's expression was immediate, but quickly controlled. His eyes swept across bank statements, security photographs, legal documents, and timeline charts arranged with the same precision I'd once applied to aircraft systems presentations at Boeing. "What's all this paperwork, Virgil?" His voice carried forced lightness, but I caught the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his wine glass slightly too tight. At 6:30, I began the presentation that would dismantle 3 years of deception with systematic precision. Hadley sat quietly in the corner, her digital recorder capturing every word for legal purposes, while Fletcher positioned himself near the front door, not to prevent escape, but to ensure Garrett's threats would be witnessed and documented. "Garrett, I've spent the last 2 months conducting an investigation into $58,000 in fraudulent debt attached to my name. I began using the same measured tone I'd employed in countless Boeing project reviews. What I discovered was a systematic campaign of identity theft, mail fraud, and elder financial abuse that began during my wife's final illness. I walked him through the evidence methodically. Chase Bank security footage showing him opening accounts in my name change of address forms, filed during Dorothy's chemotherapy treatments. credit applications using information only family members could access. These applications required intimate knowledge of my financial history going back 20 years. I continued watching his mask slip incrementally with each revelation. My mother's maiden name, my first mortgage amount from 1987, my Boeing employee identification number. Information I shared with precious few people during the most vulnerable period of my life. At 7:30, Millicent's face appeared on my laptop screen via video call, her presence adding devastating credibility to our case. Garrett's face went white as she began speaking in her precise librarian's voice. "Hello, Gerald," she said, using the name he'd given her 3 years earlier. "Or should I call you Garrett Thompson, as you're known to this family? I'm Millicent Harper. You destroyed my relationship with my daughter Rebecca and stole $43,000 from my late husband's Boeing pension. The systematic revelation of his previous identity, his identical methods, his pattern of targeting Boeing retirees during family medical crises, each detail struck like hammer blows against his carefully constructed facade. You specialized in grieving widows and overwhelmed families," Millicent continued. "You positioned yourself as helpful, caring, eager to assist with complex paperwork during times of crisis. Then you exploited our trust to steal our identities and destroy our families." By 8:15, Garrett's charming mask had completely shattered, replaced by something cold and calculating that I recognized from the bank security footage. This was the real predator, finally exposed, after years of hiding behind manufactured charm. "Gerald Matthews Garrett Thompson, or whatever you're calling yourself next year," I said, standing to face him directly. "6 Boeing families, 6 systematic campaigns of identity theft, 6 destroyed relationships and stolen retirements. But this time, you made a crucial mistake." "What mistake is that, old man?" The contempt in his voice was naked now, all pretense abandoned. "You underestimated your victims. You assumed we'd remain isolated, ashamed, too overwhelmed to fight back. But you targeted the wrong community. Boeing engineers don't give up when systems fail. We find the root cause and fix the problem." At 9:00, the final confrontation began with Garrett's desperate attempt to regain control, through intimidation, the last tool in his predator's arsenal. "You think you're so clever with your little investigation," he snarled, his voice rising to the aggressive tone Bethany had learned to fear. "But you're just a lonely old man who can't accept that his precious daughter chose me over Daddy's paranoid fantasies. Actually, Garrett Bethany chose truth over manipulation. She chose family over a predator who exploited her love to steal from her father." Bethany stepped forward, her voice steady with hard-won strength. "I chose to stop making excuses for someone who used my mother's death as an opportunity to destroy my father's financial security." Garrett's final gambit was pure threat, delivered with the cold calculation of someone who'd used intimidation to silence previous victims. "You think you can destroy me? You have no idea what I'm capable of, old man. Accidents happen to people who stick their noses where they don't belong." "You think you can intimidate me?" I replied, feeling Dorothy's strength flowing through my words. "I'm 71 years old, and I help design aircraft that carry millions of people safely through the sky. I've spent my entire career making sure systems don't fail, and you, Garrett, are a failed system that's about to be permanently grounded." Hadley's recorder captured every threat, every admission, every moment of Garrett's complete exposure. Fletcher documented the intimidation attempts that would add witness tampering to his federal charges. As 9:30 approached, Garrett stormed toward the door, his final words carrying the impotent rage of a predator whose hunting grounds had been permanently closed. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You'll regret crossing me." But as I watched him flee into the December night, I knew with engineering certainty that his reign of terror had ended. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were prepared, and justice was finally within reach. The truth had been unveiled, and it was devastating. December 3rd brought the satisfaction of walking into Spokane Police Department headquarters with a briefcase full of evidence and the quiet confidence of someone who'd built an airtight case. Detective Sarah Martinez, Fletcher's former colleague in financial crimes, reviewed our documentation with the methodical attention that federal prosecutors demanded. "Mr. Townsend, this is the most comprehensive elder fraud case I've seen in 15 years, she said, studying Hadley's legal summary alongside our evidence compilation. "Federal identity theft, mail, fraud, systematic targeting of vulnerable populations, we're looking at significant prison time." The 48-hour evidence review process felt like quality control inspections at Boeing Systematic Thorough, designed to identify any weaknesses before moving forward. By December 5th, federal prosecutors had issued arrest warrants for Garrett Thompson, with additional charges pending as the investigation expanded. December 6th delivered the justice I'd been working toward for 3 months. Garrett was arrested at his marketing firm's downtown office, led away in handcuffs, while his colleagues watched in shock. The charges were serious federal identity theft, mail fraud, elder financial abuse, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He didn't resist arrests, Detective Martinez reported to our assembled team that evening, but he immediately demanded a lawyer and refused to answer questions. His attorney is already talking about plea negotiations. The legal proceedings from January through March 2025 followed the methodical pace of federal court systems, discovery phases, evidence review, witness preparation, and the careful documentation that would ensure justice was both served and seen to be served. Hadley guided us through each phase with the same precision she'd applied to building our case. Federal prosecutors don't take cases to trial unless they're confident of conviction, she explained during a February strategy meeting. The evidence we've compiled gives them that confidence. Millicent proved to be a powerful witness. Her librarian's attention to detail and her dignified presentation of facts, creating compelling testimony that established Garrett's pattern of predation. I've waited 3 years for this opportunity to protect other families, she told the federal prosecutor. I won't let Gerald or Garrett hurt anyone else. April brought the breakthrough that transformed our case from significant to devastating. 3 additional Boeing retiree families came forward, each with stories identical to ours. Systematic identity theft during family medical crises, sophisticated manipulation of trust relationships, and financial devastation that extended far beyond mere dollars. Your investigation opened the floodgates, Detective Martinez explained. When the arrest made local news, other victims found the courage to come forward. We now have documented evidence of at least 9 families victimized over 4 years. The federal charges expanded to include racketeering. Garrett's systematic targeting of the Boeing retirement community constituted organized criminal activity under federal law. The potential prison sentence jumped from 18 months to 5 years. May brought the plea bargain negotiations that would determine Garrett's fate. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy federal trial, his attorney recommended accepting the prosecutor's offer. 18 months in federal prison, 3 years, supervised probation and restitution of $250,000 to be distributed among all victims. It's not full justice, Hadley explained to our victim support group, but it's realistic justice. Garrett will serve real prison time, have a permanent federal criminal record, and be required to pay substantial restitution. Most importantly, he'll be monitored for years to prevent future predation. The restitution amount meant I would recover approximately $35,000 of my $58,000 loss, about 60% recovery, which Hadley assured me was typical for financial fraud cases. The money matters, but the criminal record and prison time matter more. Garrett will never again be able to present himself as trustworthy to vulnerable families. June 15th brought the sentencing hearing that would close this chapter of our ordeal. The federal courthouse in Spokane was packed with victims, family members, and community supporters who'd followed our case through local media coverage. Judge Patricia Morrison, known for her tough sentences in elder abuse cases, listened carefully to victim impact statements from myself, Millicent, and 3 other Boeing families. The cumulative effect was powerful, not just individual stories of financial loss, but a pattern of systematic predation that had terrorized our entire community. Your Honor, I said when called to address the court, we're here not for revenge, but to protect other families from this predator. Garrett Thompson exploited our trust, our grief, and our family bonds to steal not just our money, but our sense of security and our faith in human decency. Bethany's statement brought tears to many eyes in the courtroom. Your Honor, my father didn't just save our family when he refused to accept this theft. He saved families we'll never meet, families who might have been Garrett's future victims. Judge Morrison's sentence was firm and final. 18 months federal prison, 3 years supervised probation, $210,000 restitution, and a permanent ban on accessing other people's financial information in any professional capacity. As Garrett was led away to begin his sentence, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, relief, and something unexpected, a sense that this victory extended far beyond our personal situation. Walking out of the courthouse with Bethany Fletcher Millicent and the other victim families, I realized that our fight for justice had created something larger than individual vindication. We'd built a community of survivors who'd refused to accept victimization, who turned pain into protection for others. Dad, Bethany said as we stood on the courthouse steps. What happens now? I looked around at the faces of people who'd become family through shared struggle and mutual support, and felt Dorothy's presence guiding my answer. Now we make sure this never happens to another family. Our mission is just beginning. The legal process was complete, but I was beginning to understand that true justice extended far beyond courtrooms and prison sentences. It lived in the community we'd built and the protection we could offer to others. July 15th, 2025 marked the beginning of something Dorothy would have been proud of. 45 Boeing retirees filled the Spokane Community Center's main conference room for our first Financial Security and Retirement seminar, their faces carrying the same mixture of vulnerability and determination I'd felt 8 months earlier when I'd first discovered Garrett's theft. My name is Virgil Townsend. I began standing before the group with the same systematic approach I'd once used for aircraft safety briefings. 7 months ago, I discovered that someone I trusted had stolen $58,000 from my retirement accounts. Today, I want to share what I learned about protecting ourselves and our families from financial predators. Fletcher and Millicent flanked me at the presentation table, our alliance having evolved into something larger than mutual support. We'd become educators, advocates, and guardians for our community. The seminar covered practical topics: recognizing manipulation tactics, protecting personal information, establishing financial safeguards, and most importantly, trusting the instincts that had served us well through decades of working life. The most dangerous predators don't look like criminals, Millicent explained to the attentive audience. They look like helpful family members, caring neighbors, or professional advisors. They exploit our trust during our most vulnerable moments. August brought healing I hadn't expected. Bethany began attending counseling sessions to process the psychological trauma of discovering she'd been married to a predator who'd exploited her love to steal from her father. The sessions helped her understand that she'd been a victim too manipulated and used as an unwitting accomplice in Garrett's crimes. "Dad, I've been thinking about what Mom used to say about turning pain into purpose," she told me during one of our renewed Sunday dinners. "Maybe my experience can help other adult children recognize when someone is manipulating their family relationships." Her emotional healing manifested in practical ways. She began dating again cautiously but hopefully, and started speaking at our monthly seminars about recognizing manipulation in intimate relationships. Her perspective as both victim and survivor added crucial credibility to our prevention message. September brought the formalization of our community protection efforts. The Boeing Retirees Financial Security Program became an official nonprofit organization funded by portions of our restitution payments and supported by donations from community members who understood the value of prevention. We established partnerships with local banks to improve fraud detection systems, worked with law enforcement to enhance elder abuse investigation protocols, and created educational materials specifically designed for our demographic people who'd built careers on precision and reliability, but might be vulnerable to sophisticated emotional manipulation. We're not just protecting bank accounts, I explained to our growing volunteer base. We're protecting the dignity and security that people earn through a lifetime of hard work. October marked the 1-year anniversary of my first credit alert, and the transformation felt profound. What had begun as personal violation had evolved into community protection. Bethany and I hosted a small dinner party, Fletcher, Millicent, Hadley, and several other families from our support network, to reflect on the journey we'd traveled together. Dorothy always said our job is to leave the world better than we found it, I shared as we raised glasses in her memory. I think she'd approve of what we've built here. Bethany's response captured the wisdom we'd all gained through our ordeal. Sometimes, the best revenge is making sure it never happens to another family. The statistics validated our efforts in the 10 months since Garrett's arrest. Reported elder financial abuse in Spokane County had decreased by 30%. More importantly, our educational seminars had reached over 400 Boeing retirees and their families, creating a network of informed, vigilant community members who looked out for each other. Looking toward the future, I see our mission expanding beyond Spokane. Other Boeing communities, Seattle, Everett, Charleston, have requested our educational materials and presentation frameworks. The systematic approach that helped me investigate Garrett's crimes now serves as a template for community protection programs nationwide. Millicent, now 75 and more energetic than she'd been in years, has become our program coordinator. "Virgil, we've created something that will outlast all of us," she said during our recent planning meeting. "This program will protect families we'll never meet in communities we'll never visit." Fletcher continues to serve as our law enforcement liaison and his connections have helped establish similar programs in 6 other cities. You know what the best part is, he told me recently. Predators like Garrett rely on isolated, ashamed victims. We've created the opposite connected, informed, empowered communities. As I write this 18 months after that first devastating credit alert, I'm sitting in Dorothy's chair surrounded by letters from families who've avoided financial predators because of our educational programs. Each letter represents a family that will never experience the betrayal and violation we endured. The wound Garrett inflicted on our family has healed into something stronger, a scar that reminds us of our vulnerability, but also of our resilience. We learned that predators count on our isolation, our shame, and our reluctance to fight back. But we also learned that when families and communities unite around protection and education, predators lose their power. Bethany was right. Sometimes the best revenge is prevention, and sometimes the most profound healing comes from ensuring that others never experience the pain that nearly broke us. Our mission continues, one family at a time, one community at a time, building the world. Dorothy always believed we could create a place where trust is earned, wisdom is shared, and families protect each other. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below.